favorite music 24/7. This is TRAXXfm.
Good afternoon. It's Music Sundays on TRAXXfm. Our guest in the studios this afternoon is talking to us about curating urban culture. He is Ong Kar Jin, and we welcome him to the studios of TRAXXfm. Welcome.
Hi guys, great to be on board here.
Oh, thank you for coming on a Sunday. Otherwise, what would you be doing?
Probably still looking at museums and more art and more urban culture.
More art and more. You're a curator.
Yes, although I have to clarify that I'm a freelance curator. Most curators in Malaysia are freelance unless they work at some place like Balai Seni Negara or like a institutional museum, state museum.
Right. So, how did you get to be a curator?
I mean, this is one of those things that's a little bit of a DIY process, I came from a background where I studied history in university and then did corporate jobs, I have to make a living. But I was always interested in curating, in shows, in art and history. And I started writing. I started doing research. I started writing, and one thing leads to another. Do a small show here, write a little bit for an artist there, and then voila, here I am.
Right. So, okay, you're one of the rare ones. If we go back into what you're saying about history and starting to like history at a very young age, a lot of us hated history because there's so much of memorizing of dates and things which we didn't like, or that's what we thought history was a lot of. And how is it you were interested in history? What was intriguing about it for you from the start?
Yeah. Well, okay, to be very honest, I mean, sejarah was one of my favorite subjects, so I might have been a bit of a weird kid then.
Okay.
But I was really bad at memorizing dates. To be honest, even today, I can't remember 1971, what happened, blah, de blah. But for me, I just treated it like a big storybook, right? It's a huge narrative, and when I started studying it in university and getting to know history as a subject much more on a deeper level, that's when I realized that, wow, there are so many angles even to one story.
Right.
Right.
And it doesn't have to have dates to it.
It doesn't have to have dates. It's more about understanding why did people think that way? How did this happen? How did one thing lead to another? And how nobody can seem to agree on why it happened. And I think that's the beauty of history right there.
Okay, so what in history caught you first? Like really, from there you started like wanting to have books on it, wanting to read, wanting to find out more. What happened in history that made you so interested?
Yeah, I think for me it was, to play to a stereotype about men on TikTok. It was the Roman Empire.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit of a joke that all men think about the Roman Empire all the time. But I think for me it was that because I was just fascinated. I watched to my shame, I mean, I will not be ashamed to admit, I watched Gladiator, the movie,
Okay.
and I was like, this is so cool. This whole world that seems like almost like a fantasy movie, but
Right.
it all existed. It was all real, right? And that's how I started being interested in it, looking at books, looking at pictures, looking at all these things, and I think that was my entry point into art as well, right?
Right.
Because so much of what we know about history is from art paintings, from murals, from depictions, sculptures, statues, and all that.
Were you artistic? Were you good at art?
No, I'm terrible. I can't draw to save my life. I'm
So-
left-handed,
Okay.
really chaka ayam kind of guy, To this day, sometimes I read my own notes and I'm like, what did I say there? So maybe it's like one of those things where it's precisely because I'm singularly untalented at making art that I just have so much respect for people who dedicate their lives to making such artistic things, whether
So-
it's music or painting or
Right.
etc.
Right. Okay. Music aside, when it comes to art and drawings and things, we sometimes wonder, like when you go to a art museum or art exhibition, and you look at art, and a lot of people go there and they look at, and I'm wondering, like, what are you looking at? Like, how do I know if an art piece is good? I guess it has its appeal.
Yeah.
To certain people, it'll be appealing, but to some people who do not know, it's, that's where we need to educate a lot of people, or we need to educate, including myself, what it is that we should be looking out for. So what do we look for when we look at an art piece?
Well, I mean, I think obviously, art is very, very subjective.
Yeah.
But, so I can only really speak to what I feel is a good approach. So I think there is art that really speaks to people's heart. You see it on the wall and there's something about it that moves you, that you don't necessarily need to read that long wall text and explanation to really see that there's something about it. It might not even be a beautiful art piece, so to
Right.
speak. It could be very grotesque, it could be very ugly in some senses, but it provokes something in you. And I think good art should elicit a reaction. Even if you hate it, that's fine, but it's done something. I mean, I think the worst art and the worst, I guess, it applies to all media. The worst music, the worst movies, the worst art is the one that you see it and you don't feel anything and you forget you even did it in the first place.
All right, that's the worst one. Right. The ones that you hate, you said.
Yeah.
It's like when you go to the movies, right? And then you hate this character. I
Yeah.
hate, but that character, that
Has done their
person,
job.
They've done their job.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think that's the kind of worst kind of art, the incredibly forgettable ones.
Right.
And after that, it's some people, the kind of masterly paintings, Van Gogh and all that, where you can see the technique and all that appeals to them. And I think in contemporary art, what we mean by contemporary art is new art that's coming out today, produced by artists. They've moved a lot to the more abstract things, or more installation-based things where they're hanging like a banana from the ceiling
With tape.
I mean,
tape
you
it to the wall.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And I think that's where it becomes a huge debate. What is art? What's the point of it all? And I think at the end of the day, it's almost there will be as many opinions as there are artists. So it's really how it provokes you, I think.
Correct. Okay. All right. So I've got some questions over here. Zama is prepared, and also Achu is prepared over here. Achu, you all right? Yeah. All right. Okay. Can you introduce yourself again?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And tell us about your role at the Urban Museum.
Yeah, so my name is Kar Jin. I am a freelance curator and writer. A little bit of everything sometimes. And my role at the Urban Museum, or specifically Plus N, which is the third branch of the Urban Museum located at Tun HS Lee, right in the middle of Chinatown, smacked in between all these flower shops and boutiques, I was the co-curator. So I had another person, Lim Xiao Yun, who was the co-curator of this particular show, which displays the artworks, more than 70 artworks from the collection of landscape architect Ng Sek San. So
Okay.
Sek San, he's a landscape architect, but he's also very well known for, he cares a lot about social issues. He cares a lot about grassroots communities, about, even some political issues. And so throughout the years, he's collected so much art from emerging artists, from student artists, from many artists, and they've formed this huge collection. I think he has more than 500 works in his collection.
Right.
And what we did was we looked at the selection, we looked at the collection, we looked at what are the kind of stories we can tell from here. How can we tell a story not just of the collector, but of KL, of Malaysia, and how we've developed from the 90s to the early 2000s, which is where most of his artwork is concentrated in.
Right. So it's reflected in the art pieces that are
Yes.
being displayed.
Yes.
Oh, lovely. Okay. So what does your day-to-day work as a curator look like? What does it look like?
So I think when we started the project, it was, talking to someone like Sek San, the collector, and understanding, why did you collect? What is in your collection? What is it that you're trying to achieve with this exhibition? It's very much like a consultation process, understanding the collector and what they are looking for. And then from there, it's looking at the 500 works, going through, it's like being a librarian at that point.
Okay.
And I'm just looking through each artwork. Oh, there's one hanging here, there's one hanging there. Going through the storeroom and say, okay, he has this. Oh, and then from there, it's like, how do we curate that? How do we select the artworks that, this section can be this theme, this section can be this theme. And then once we curate the selection, then it's how do we arrange it? How do we write the story? How do we bring out the stories? How do we educate the audience about, the importance or the context of some of these artworks?
Right.
And then I think finally it's coming into the space. It's, which artwork goes on which wall? How do we, very white cube kind of gallery, or do we make it dramatic, paint it red and have this sense of a corridor?
Right. You have
So-
such an important job.
Well, it's a job that I think a lot of people don't really understand.
Yeah,
you know?
correct. Because a lot of people don't understand artworks to begin with, and for you to actually have to try and get that message through, it's like, and also when you say you arrange it, it's like when you go to a supermarket and you buy something.
Yeah.
There's a reason why this is put in front. There's a
Exactly.
reason why that's put there and
Yeah,
there
yeah.
and there. So you catch on to what they want to promote straight away.
Exactly. I mean, you could say it's a little bit of the psychological kind of aspect,
Right.
about thinking about your perspective as you walk in, the creating a feeling, an emotion, a journey throughout a space, using and bringing the artwork in dialogue with what your thoughts are.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. What makes the Urban Museum different from the National Museum?
Yeah, so so Plus and the urban museums out there, they're much smaller than the National Museum. I think that's one of the biggest differences, right? It's a single shop lot in the middle of a heritage zone, and there are limitations, of course, with such a space. The ceilings are low, it's a refurbished shop lot, but I think there's also beauty to be had in that. So I think we kind of think a little about the Museum of Innocence in Istanbul, which is a museum that's based on this book by the Nobel Prize winning author Orhan Pamuk. And what he did was he took a shop lot and he told a story of how he loved this woman for all his life, and he collected her cigarette butts. He collected these pieces of paper of receipts that they went on a date somewhere.
Right.
And although it's such a small museum, it feels so intimate, and it tells a very, very different story. And national museums, they often have to tell the story of like, this is the development of Malaysia and the world. They have to do grand narratives.
Right.
Whereas like smaller museums, like the Urban Museum, we can have a much more smaller focus. Just tell like this one particular story that's important perhaps to a smaller community, but tells a story that eventually illustrates how it all came together and how these people actually had a contribution to a larger picture.
Good. So you're not distracted from other things that are not supposed to be thought of. And You're just concentrating on what you're trying to sell.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like alternative stories as well, right?
Right.
I mean, because, I think when it comes to national museums, not just in Malaysia, but everywhere, right? Their concern is always, how do we put our country's best forward, right? How do we put out a official history of the nation? Whereas what an urban museum or smaller museums can do is, let's highlight the stories that people usually don't tell. The stories of maybe, let's say, Orang Asli, the stories of, say, groups that were perhaps more ignored or marginalized in some way.
Right. So how do you choose what you want to display and what you want to show?
I would say it's a combination of many factors, right? So I think firstly, it's what kind of story do you want to tell? I think for Plus N, I think the story you wanted to tell is of the late 1990s and early 2000s, where there was so much. It was the Asian financial crisis. It was that whole period of protests and lots of political things going on in that period. And many artists themselves were involved. They were thinking about these questions. They were making art that was provocative and thoughtful. And so we wanted to tell that story. And so looking at the collection, it's, what are the works that speak to that era? That, for example, like if someone from Gen Z comes, right, they're like, apa tu? What is this? The Asian financial crisis doesn't mean anything in a visceral level to like younger folk, right? And
Yeah.
so we wanted to pick artworks perhaps that could let them feel like, what was it like to be there? Were these people so concerned about? Why was these things important to them? So that's one. And I think the second is, sometimes it's just, how do we work with the space? Like, if there's a giant wall, then we need an artwork that won't feel like it's like drowned in that giant wall. If it's a very small space, then how do we pick artworks that give you a feeling of going through a journey whilst working with the limitations of a smaller space?
Right. Okay. Ong Kar Jin is our guest in the studios of TRAXXfm today. He's talking to us about curating urban culture. We'll be back in a bit from now. Stay right there.
TRAXXfm 90.3 Kuala Lumpur.
Good afternoon. It's 35 minutes past 3 on a Sunday. Our guest is Ong Kar Jin. He's a curator, and we're talking about curating urban culture. And we stopped at talking about how he includes what he wants in an exhibit. And we'd like to find out now how you connect with the local community through your exhibitions.
Hi guys. Oh, I have to add one more thing to
Go on.
To that, which is that sometimes it's not really up to me entirely.
Okay.
Everything is a dialogue with the collector, with the museum, with everybody, and I guess also with the, like what you said, with the urban community, right? So I would say it's I sometimes I do wish that I could have be like, hey, I want to do this and do that, and that's the end of the story. But it's often a very consultative, consensus-driven process, and I think that's often what comes out of it.
So that can be frustrating too, right?
I mean, of
especially
course.
when you have something that you think is going to work great, but then somebody else says, no, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah, exactly, right. But,
Right.
But, sometimes I think it also makes the work better.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you're always engaged in dialogue, and sometimes it's through those conversations that something better comes out, Like, as curators, sometimes I think we can get a bit carried away, we're like, oh, we want to do shishi art thing, and then...
What's a shishi art thing?
Like some strange thing hanging and all that, and and we might not think about, say, accessibility, about what's the educational aspect of it. How do we reach out to people that aren't necessarily going to all these fancy openings with wine glasses in their hand,
correct.
kind of thing, right?
Correct.
So I think that's very important, especially for something like an urban museum that's in a smaller communities. How do we reach out to people who aren't necessarily quote unquote artsy people, or say to tourists, to visitors to Malaysia, to give them a glimpse of what Malaysian history and culture is like?
Nice. Okay, is there more focus on the current city life and diverse communities?
Yeah, so I think for this particular exhibition at N+, what we wanted to talk about as well via the exhibition was different perspectives, So, the exhibition itself is very focused on that period of the 90s, Asian financial crisis, and all the political crises that happened after that. So a lot of the initial perspectives that people think of are kind of the loud and very brash political activists, right? The guys get in trouble all the time.
Right.
And, that's one model of how people talk about these things, how people voice out their opinion. But what we wanted to explore is, how do other artists also, explore things in a more subtle way, and more discussive kind of way. So, for example, there's this artist called Gan Zihui. He made some artwork that was basically kind of like a painting of a map of inner city KL.
Right.
And, he had these little figures that, you could move around on a magnet board. So he painted on a magnet board, and you could move these figures around. So in that way, it was something that's interactive. People find it very fun and engaging, but it also told a story of how the urban landscape has changed. Because when you start moving those characters around, then you're noticing, oh wow, like Taman Merdeka isn't around anymore. It's been replaced by PMB 118. Oh, these shop lots aren't around anymore. It's been replaced by, a fancy hotel. And then through that, people kind of realize, wow, the city landscape has changed.
Right. Shouldn't there be a lot of school involvement in what's going on?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. And the team at Plus N by Ermu is trying to do. They're really trying to do more educational stuff, like from art education, which is like live drawing sessions, so that art students can learn how to work with live subjects when they're drawing, to people like Seksan, the collector, giving a talk on how he started, and how actually it's a common conception that people think, oh, you gotta be like a rich Datuk level kind of person to buy art, but actually that's not true at all. There's a lot of art by students, by younger artists, that is all, like you can buy a nice piece of art for a few hundred ringgit, for a few thousand ringgit.
Right.
And these artists deserve our support. And I always say to people, instead of buying like putting more wood paneling in your newly interior decorated apartment, spend a little bit and support a young artist with their artwork.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
for something unique as well. That's only yours.
Right. And even you can get them engaged in, like, use them for your establishment if you're opening a place.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Use them to do the artwork around.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So where is
you
this
know-
this source of people to look for? Where can they find them?
I mean, so there are actually quite a few galleries in KL. There are galleries like Backroom that's in Zhongshan Building, and it's a very small gallery. It's literally smaller than this room here, so it's like 100 square feet.
Okay.
But because it's small, it can do things with young emerging artists that are very accessible, that are very affordable for younger people to engage with the artwork, and it's a very, very friendly gallery. So
Right.
that's one example. And then the other example is, we have all these universities, UITM, One Academy, Das Ein Academy, and all the students, when they graduate with their art, they
Right.
actually put on art shows, and they do try to invite people to come and look at their art and actually buy their art if they love it so much.
Right.
So I think there is perhaps a lack of awareness about these things, and also I can't blame people because sometimes it can feel very intimidating. You walk into a gallery that looks fancy and you're even shy to ask, is this for sale?
Right.
You know?
Right. And you get a prize like, yeah, it's for 15.
Yeah, and then you feel embarrassed. But
Right.
there are a lot of galleries out there who are really trying very hard. A lot of universities and institutions that are trying very hard to reach out to people and say, hey, don't buy a generic, expensive marble piece to put on your wall. Buy
Right.
a unique artwork from a local artist who actually has a relationship with you.
Nice, isn't it? Yeah, I remember a time because I'm from the old school, and those days, you'd actually have things like postcards to send to people, and postcards
Yes.
were always, painted or drawn by even Dato' Lat.
Yes,
Lat
yes.
himself used to have lots of all his cards going on.
exactly.
And I think it's an opportunity for a lot of young artists to actually have their art out there. But unfortunately, a lot of people stop sending mail anymore.
Yeah. So I think there are all these avenues, right? Like, now we're in kind of a very digital era. So in some ways, what I would encourage people to do is that if you find an artist, a Malaysian artist on Instagram, and you're like, wow, their work is nice, DM them, direct message them on Instagram.
Right.
You would be surprised. 95% of the time, they will respond because they are just so excited a lot of the time that, wow, a person who is not an art person has reached out to me and the work has moved them.
Right.
And they're so happy to see someone message them.
Correct. It'd be nice to see actually a lot of them doing a lot of, like sometimes you paint a building and it's so boring in town. In some places, like it's just a grey building or, come on. Get artists to do some.
Or even like the interior decorations, right? Like, more wood paneling, more marble.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Like, let's engage with the local art scene.
Correct. Okay, and where do people find you?
They can follow me on Instagram, I guess. That would be the easiest. My handle is at Durian Democracy.
Durian Democracy.
Yeah.
Okay, you're a fan of durians, are you?
I love durian.
Okay, Ong Kar Jin is our guest talking to us about curating urban culture. And what advice? What advice do you have for those interested in curating or museum work?
So I think one thing that I would say is that there is a lot of diversity in the arts industry that a lot of people aren't aware of. There are many jobs in the art industry that people don't know about. For instance, there are curators, yes, and then there are writers. There are installers, like when you think about it, who are the people who actually put up the painting, or if it's a complicated sculpture, you need a guy who's pretty specialized to put those things up.
Right.
Or who are the lighting people? Who are the framers? Framing an artwork is actually a very delicate process. So there are all these roles and all these different aspects of art that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, both on the technical side, because I think a lot of people think art means you have to be an artist. No, that's not true. But I think one thing that is challenging about the art industry is that the art industry typically does not pay very well. It's an industry where it's driven so much by passion, right? I see so many young people who, they work at jobs that don't necessarily pay the best, and they have to do everything, but they're there because of the passion. So for people who are interested in that role, in those roles, I would say, think about the wider kind of different roles that are available, not just being an artist, for example, not just being a curator. And secondly, feel free to reach out to people. Like, I think people in the art community are generally very happy to speak to people because, like you said, like what on earth does a curator do? What on earth do these people do?
Hannah's handing you the phone.
So what on earth do these people do?
Right.
Like they need to do all these things.
Correct.
And I would say that it's all about exposure. Like, go and see art shows. Go and see openings. Like, it doesn't cost you anything to walk into a gallery.
Right.
It's free. A lot of people.
And if they meet
think
people like
that-
you, why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
So-
yeah, go ahead. Look at it. What she's saying.
So I think that's really, really important.
Correct.
And I have to shout out like all these people who are involved. Like, obviously, Plus N, which is the Urban Museum.
What's
but
Plus
also-
N? Tell us about that.
Plus N. I think so. I guess to kind of go back to it, the Urban Museums is a collection of 3 museums. It's actually the idea of having a decentralized museum. Instead of having one big museum,
Okay.
let's have one place. Let's have like one shop lot here, and one shop lot here, and one shop lot here, right? So there's the first one, which is Ermu in Bukit Bintang.
Okay, what does Ermu mean?
Urban Museum. It's like
okay.
an abbreviation.
Ermu, all right.
Yeah, Ermu. So there's one in Bukit Bintang. The second one is called Toffee.
All right.
Which is at Lebo Ampang.
All right.
And the third one is Plus N, which is at Tun HS Lee.
Right. So what do each and every one of them have?
Yeah,
What's
so I
in
think-
Ermu?
So I think the idea was that we actually in KL we actually have all these collectors, right? A lot of them have collected for decades, right? And some of them have hundreds, if not thousands, of work that never see the light of day, that aren't shared with the public, and it's such a pity, right?
All right.
So I think Ermu was set up as that idea of like, how do we provide a space that allows these collectors to tell their story and share their artwork with the public. So the first Ermu was the collection of Dr. Tan Lokman. He's an architect and also the owner of Ermu. The second one, Toffee, is a kind of collaboration between Dr. Tan Lokman's collection as well as Pakaruddin Sulaiman's, who is a lawyer, his collection. And the third Ermu, which is N+, is from the Plus N, sorry, is from the collection of Ng Sek San, which is a landscape architect.
Right.
So it's really this group of people who really have this great desire to share with the public.
And how old are some of these collections?
I think most of them started collecting in the early 90s. So not super old, I suppose. In the world of art, there are people who
Right.
started collecting in the 60s and
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So I would say that most of these artworks are of the 90s and early 2000s, of that period where all the artists were like itchy and really ready to have a more rebellious attitude.
Right. Okay. Oh, nice. What's been the most rewarding part of this journey so far?
I would say it's actually learning and meeting people, really. I think with any job, the best thing about it is learning and meeting people. So what I mean by that is, meeting people like the artists who, for example, there's this particular artwork in the Urban Museum at Plus N, by Ahmad Zaki Anwar, who is an artist. He works a lot with charcoal, in particular, and he makes the most beautiful, almost photorealistic portraits of people oftentimes. And he had this portrait, black and white in charcoal, and really looks like a photograph from afar of this guy called Afong, who was this guy who had HIV/AIDS when he was first portrayed. And the artwork was done in the early 2000s, and I was like, oh, I wonder how Afong is now. Back then it was quite a taboo. It was, a lot of people were discriminated against. It was and I thought it was so brave of Ahmad Zaki Anwar to portray Afong. And in the very same series, he portrayed people who were like very important, like the National Artist Laureate, like a big important guys right next to Afong, right? And I met Ahmad Zaki Anwar at the show and asked him, hey, we have this artwork, it's Afong. And he says, Afong's still alive. I just met him last week. And I was
lovely.
like, that's amazing.
Right.
It's amazing that he's still alive, that he's still doing, activist work about HIV/AIDS.
Is he not going to be doing another drawing of Afong now in the current age?
I don't know. I think artists, they evolve, they do many different kinds of work, but you never know.
Right, he should do something called It's Still Kicking.
Yeah. So, I think for me, when I heard that story, I just found that so moving that he's still there. And those, I think, are the moments, everybody's like suffering. I'm like sweating, putting up the lights and all. But those moments make it all worth it.
Right. So, yeah, lots of stories to tell over there, yeah? Visitors who go to the Urban Museum, what message are you hoping they take away when they go visit the Urban Museum? He's looking for something. Hannah? Hannah's disturbing him, aren't you?
I guess what I'm looking forward next to is like, your next Saturday at Plus N by Ermu.
What would you do without Hannah?
Yeah, I know, right? There's like all these like notes flying around, and then like she's like staring at me.
Yeah.
Hello, Kar Jin.
Make sure you talk about it. Okay, all right.
Yeah. But I gotta do this. All right. So I think next Saturday at Plus N by Ermu, they'll be hosting a talk by an upcoming artist, Aiman Hafizal, who is a UITM graduate. So they'll have regular updates on their Instagram. So they can find them on their website. Ermu. You can just Google Ermu, URMU, or N plus by URMU to find their Instagram handle, to find their website, etc.
Right.
But I always encourage people, go to these artist talks, right? So, go to these artist talks, go to these events. They're free. And what we often want is just, we want people who are not involved in the arts,
right,
to come and learn.
That's right. So a lot of times people are not saying no to the exhibit or to going, because it's just that they don't care, NOW.
Yeah. I mean,
correct.
They don't know. And, there was once that I wanted to invited some friends to a gallery and I say, hey, come and see this exhibition. And they were like, oh, have to pay to masuk. And I was like, no, not
right.
at all. Please come.
Right.
Please come for the event. Please come for a gallery opening.
Right. So if all curators are nice to talk to like you, I mean, are they all nice to talk to like you?
Well, I think most of them are.
Right.
are very happy to talk about their work.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think sometimes with curators, sometimes our struggle is how do we reach out to people who are not in the arts, because as with many kind of industry specific jobs, sometimes we can get caught up in the jargon, right? Contemporary installation, mixed media,
right.
which I think doesn't mean a lot to someone who just wants to see art. So I think it's all about how do we make that bridge and make those connections with people and make it a friendlier place.
Correct, because you're only human, and it's like you're so used to it.
Yeah,
you might tend to forget that other people don't see things the way you do.
Yes,
and that could be
yeah, exactly.
Right.
I
okay.
mean, it's like, I guess it's with any kind of profession or technical thing,
yeah, for sure.
Don't get caught up in the jargon and the alphabet soup.
Right. If I were to tell you about continuity over here and all that stuff, it would be the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Hannah, what else has he forgotten?
Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah. I almost kena pancong kepala here,
Okay. Anything else you want to add? You want to tell us about that? We should know. That's important.
Yeah, I think we are in this moment in KL, right? So I think KL. There was a period where I think KL as a city, we saw the city become more empty, right? A lot of a lot of the banks, a lot of the consultancy firms, a lot of the offices, law firms, they all started moving out of KL in the 90s and early 2000s. But now I think KL is really coming back to life, roaring to life, right? So you see things like Petaling Street becoming, so hot as a destination. And as with that, we see things like, Bangunan Sultan Abdul Samad is being refurbished, being restored, being brought back to life. Medan Pasar, that whole area is being brought back to life. The Ermus, they are in Lebo Ampang, in Chinatown. Places that used to be, people would think, it's kind of dangerous, it's kind of gritty, these places. And so I think we're in this very unique moment, and I'm super looking forward to KL becoming perhaps an art center for the entire region. We'll take the crown from Singapore, maybe.
Yeah.
So I encourage everybody, go and see shows. Go and see. I think one of the shows that is currently open now today, that just opened, is at Ilham Gallery, which is at Ilham Tower. And I think they have a fantastic show called The Plantation Plot, which is about our history of plantations in Malaysia and also globally. So I encourage people to go there, take a look at it. It's an amazing show that's global, has artists from America, from Latin America, from Vietnam, everywhere. All the artwork is there, and it's free.
Nice. And what's a good place to go to get all this information that you're talking about?
Well, definitely check out the Urban Museum website. That's just Google URMU, and as well as follow people on Instagram. I mean, feel free to follow me on Instagram. I suppose
Yes.
always have updates, and I if anyone is interested in the arts, whether they are interested to learn more, to work in the arts, or to just support art, feel free to reach out.
Right. And follow you on Instagram. And what's your handle?
Durian Democracy.
Durian Democracy. Ong Kar Jin, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here at Studios.
And thank you for having us.
Right. And thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
For without you,
I would be lost.
And thank you to Achu as well again.
Thank you.